The best has yet to come, the story of Myra. This is the story of Myra. I was born in 1925 in Troy, New York. My mother had a midwife, and I was born with a disease called erysipelas. It was pus inside my head, which had to be drained. As for food, I had to have a special formula. Besides me, there were 3 other children. My sister Georgia, born in 1916, my sister Vivian, born in 1918, and my brother Dewey, born in 1923. My mother lost quite a few other children, as my father sexually was too much for her. Eventually they separated, and being it was in the 1930s, what could she do? The country was in a depression. So we all went into a home in Troy, New York, called the Troy Orphanage, all except Georgia, who went into a Catholic home for a while, and while there she became very ill, almost TB. It caused a problem with her eyes, but eventually she also came to the Troy home. I can still remember at 83, when I had a mastoid operation on my right ear. I was 3 years old. I remembered the doctors making a fuss over me. As for my sisters, I remember only slightly at the home. I recall when they went to cooking school, bringing me some goodie. And at the home, I remember a little wooded area where once in a while we had a church service and also a picnic there. Once a year in the spring, some people would come and give the young girls Mary Jane patent leather buckled shoes. And on Christmas time, at a young age, it seems we had the tallest tree ever. Friday night was candy night. We lined up in front of the main office and received a little brown bag of candy. Once in a while, we had a picnic time in our wards. Everyone sat on the floor, and we received a brown bag with a sandwich, small pastry, and a drink. Then we imagined we were on a picnic in the woods. The only time I had a problem was when they had old-fashioned cornstarch pudding. And when it was lumpy, I just couldn't swallow it. Then I had to go and help out in the kitchen. Otherwise, it was a good home. My sister Jo at Georgia says I should write to the Troy newspaper and see if they have on file all about my problem. As a baby, they said I made the front page with medical history. I guess if nothing was done for me, I could have died or not been normal. Well, anyway, if you said to me, this is your mother or sister at this time in my life, the words would have meant nothing to me. The same for mother or father. As for mother, I only remember once in a while a pretty lady coming to see me. As for father, I never saw or heard of him till later, and then father was just a name. I was 2 years old when I went into the home. Dewey was 4, Vivian 10, Georgia 12. Vivian and Georgia weren't in the home too many years. Dewey came out when he was 8, and I left at 8 years of age. Mama was born in a village up north called Middleburg, New York. Her parents passed away in an accident when she was young. Ma also had a sister, Lulu. Afterwards, an aunt of theirs took care of them. Ma's name was Mamie, but later she changed it to Maria. Their family name was Porter. My father's name was Jesse Norman Fox, and he came from Seward, New York, a small village. He had one sister, my Aunt Elsie. She was married to a Dave Weaver, and they had one son, Stanley. Uncle Dave had a farm and was a school teacher on the side. Those days in the country, you still had the one-room schoolhouse, maybe 8 or 10 children. When it became time for me to leave the Troy home, I can still remember standing at the window waiting to see my mother to take me out. After she got me, we stayed overnight at a friend's apartment. Then the next day we went to Ma's apartment where Dewey, George, and Vivian were. As children, my brother Dewey and I had fun. You're young, no problems. Ma was our security, so to speak. She did waitress work and would bring us home sandwiches and so forth. This was in Albany, New York, the 1930s. Our other food was lots of spinach in a can, Popeye the Sailor Man's food to build muscles, plus Franco-American spaghetti. In between, Dewey and I would rob people's milk. In those days, the milkman left the milk bottle on your front stoop or stairs. And sometimes we'd take a tin milk can and get free milk at the Salvation Army, where we even bought shoes there for 15 cents. While Ma worked, Dewey and I ran the streets of Albany, and in the summer was a small pool near us, so Dewey and I would play there often. My brother loved to watch construction work, and at this time in Albany, bridges and new buildings were going up. I remember once I had to go to the toilet. Dewey said, find a tree, fence or bush. I went looking, and soon I was lost. A policeman found me crying and took me to the station. They asked me where I lived, and I didn't know. Then they said to me, where'd you get your coat I had on? I said, at the Troy orphanage, so they called and found my mom's apartment. Dewey was a wee bit upset when he came home and found out that the policeman gave me candy and ice cream. Then he wished he had gotten lost. In spite of depression times, we had fun. Movies were 10 cents and you could stay all day. There was Cowboy Tom Mix, Buck Jones, Rin Tin Tin, The Police Dog, and Shirley Temple. Dewey would stay all day in the theater and wet his pants. Ma would have to have a friend go and get him. One of my favorite candies was a lollipop called Big Daddy, a long pop on a stick, and it made Ma mad when I went to sleep with it and it got stuck in my hair. I must have been 9 or 9.5 when somehow we lost Ma. She didn't come home. My sister Georgia took responsibility for us. I remember being in someone's home. It seems I recall at Pittsfield, Mass. Why I remember this place, I recall Dewey and I getting up late and found some homemade baked beans for a sandwich. Anyways, my sister Jo or Georgia somehow got a hold of my father and asked him if he would come and get us. He was reluctant at first, but eventually came and got us. My life at this period of time is a little bit clouded, but I do remember us on Uncle Charlie's farm. He was a good, kind man, and somehow a relative of Daddy's. How long there, I don't know. In between, I remember staying in the town of Seward at Aunt Elsie's Daddy's sister. My sister, Aunt Lulu's, who had a daughter my age, Avis, to play with. Lulu had also a daughter married, Frida Knapp. At this time, I guess no one knew what to do with me. It must have been in the summer, as there was no school. Some things just happened in my life. Just like that, we were all together again on a farm near Seward. Later found out it used to belong to Daddy's family years ago. I even forgot the name of the place. I know a milk train ran behind the house. We got used to it coming and going. The house was a very large one and painted a brown shade. With it was a large barn with some cows and horses. Alongside of the barn and house was a creek. Dewey and I played in, and our one-room schoolhouse was on the other side of the creek, and a few woods we walked through to go to school. How we loved to hear the frogs croak and watch the dragonflies. Our house had no electricity as yet, so we had some beautiful oil lamps. It was Dewey and my job to wash the shades every day, and we even had fun washing clothes in an old wooden washing barrel. And it had a stick in it, and we took turns pushing it back and forth. Another job was beating the rugs out on the clothesline, and we had fun doing these things. No bathroom, just the old outhouse. In the winter we used our beautiful potty jars. People buy now to put plants in, and our tub was the oval copper tub. We washed behind the old black stove cast iron. That was living in those days. Our Christmas was nice on the farm. We went into the woods and got our tree and strung cranberries and popcorn around for decoration. And at the end of each branch was called a candle pincher. We put candles in. We lit it. It sure was pretty. And all kinds of Christmas candy from Montgomery wards. As for my education, it's very vague. How can you get one living all over? I can't remember a beginning like kindergarten or first grade. Even at the one-room schoolhouse, how could I learn with 4 boys and I was the only girl, with a potbelly stove for heat in the winter? Years later, my sister Vivian and her daughter Nancy and I took a ride to see the Fox Farm. A couple from New York City had bought it and did it all over, with many antique furniture and other items. They even bought the old one-room schoolhouse and added it to the building. The milk train tracks were no longer there, and the old barn had burned down a long time ago. But a new barn was built, and the couple had built a beautiful tree house in a tall tree outside. It was great. The family were so happy we came to visit the place and to meet the original owners and to hear about the background of the place. I still remember once an elderly lady and a gentleman came to see us, and they called her Auntie. She was very old and presumed she was the one who brought Ma and Lulu up. Daddy used to take us to see her in his old car with an open seat in the back. She lived in Middleburg. Dewey and I had fun playing her old-fashioned pump organ and looking at pictures in her old-fashioned viewfinder. I don't know much about Vivian and Joe's education, how they manage moving around so much at the one-room schoolhouse, how the teacher loved to hear me sing after school. And I remember recess time for lunch, which was a cold egg and a pancake. But fun in the winter, ice skating down the hill behind the school and playing in the barn where the wood was stored. That was fun. How it happened and when it happened, but it happened. One day, saw no Vivian or Georgia. They were gone. Later on, found out they had boyfriends and had gotten married. But now it was Daddy and us. Daddy started drinking with the family nearby. Soon he got out of control, and he'd hit Dewey and I with a switch on the back of our legs. But one day he beat Dewey with a horsewhip in the barn so much Dewey passed out. Then I got beatings, plus he started to fondle me sexually. I became afraid of him and started living in fear. My nights in a dark room were fearful. So Dewey and I talked it over. What should we do? So we decided to run away. The only one we could think about was kind Uncle Charlie. But he lived quite a few miles away in a town of scattered farms called Sharon Hill. Dewey left first, then I was alone and scared of Daddy, so I packed extra clothing and barefoot took off. I tried to stay near the woods in case he came after me. I was headed for Uncle Charlie's farm. After a while I got tired and was wet and soon fell asleep in a ditch about a mile or two from Charlie's. A couple named the Fords, who owned a small package store and gas station, found me, washed me up, and put me on a small couch in their little home behind the store. I stayed a little while with them, then later got to Charlie's farm. Dewey was there and later saw Georgia. Later on, Daddy moved in, and he helped Charlie on the farm. What happened to the Fox farm, I never did find out. Uncle Charlie loved Dewey. He was like a son he had lost at birth. Being children, we adjusted to our surroundings. Near Charlie's was a family we played with. Their names was the Wrights. Then there was the Egans. They owned a restaurant and had 2 girls. We had fun on the farms, jumping in the hay, missing the pitchfork, jumping in the oats, splashing in the water trough that the cows drank out of. And Dewey's was fun. Dewey had a pet bull he'd ride on in the fields, and he'd get me out there and chase me all over while I called at the top of my lungs, "Georgia, help me." Harvest time in the fall was a great time in those days. Farmers helped one another. My sister Jo did all the cooking and baking. It was wonderful, but I miss Seward and Aunt Elsie. She was a warm, loving person. I went to a little country church with her and some wonderful picnics with lemonade, iced tea, watermelon, homemade ice cream, all kinds of cakes, potato salad, sandwiches. They were great days. Auntie lived next to an ice house with a dam and a large pond, so Dewey and I changed up in the ice house and hoped the hornets wouldn't sting us. Outside was a tall tree with a rope to swing on and fall into a water. Many a time, barefooted, we'd walk the railroad tracks to Auntie's house. Man, she always had an old-fashioned crock full of cookies, chocolate, mincemeat, homemade elderberry pie. How we loved her place. And I enjoyed her son Stanley. He played the organ and piano. Later in life, he went to college in New York City and became a teacher, then a principal in schools, both in America and South America. The last time I saw him was when he came to Providence. He was near 80. Then we went to Brown University to an organ concert. Later he came. We went to Sarasota to see my sister Jo. The last time was with my sister Vivian. Stanley was living in an elderly care home in Herkimer, New York. He brought back so many fond memories of him, his dad, David, and Aunt Elsie. I have many fond memories at Uncle Charlie's, especially fall and winter. In the fall, Uncle would hitch his blind horse, May, up, and we'd go get different kinds of nuts. It was like blind May knew the way around the trees. Then in the spring was maple tapping tree time. We'd sip the sap from the spigot in the tree. When the buckets were taken into the sap hut to be boiled, we'd stay overnight sometimes and have breakfast, homemade pancakes with fresh maple syrup, bacon and eggs. And if there was fresh fallen snow, you poured warm maple syrup on it and it tasted great. At home, we'd pull taffy candy with buttered hand, and there even was a candy made with apple vinegar. I am overwhelmed at the price of a quart or a gallon of maple syrup these days. Those days there was no televisions, so comic books, large and small, was it. There was Flash Gordon, Tarzan, Buck Rogers, Popeye, Olive Oyl, Wimpy, and radio was in. Frank Buck's Jungle Tales used to scare the heck out of me when it was on, and I had to go down to the cellar and get some potatoes in the potato bin. My imagination went wild, so I ran upstairs as fast as I could after I grabbed the potatoes and butter out of the cooling cabinet. When it snowed bad and no school, Dewey and I walked around with snowshoes. They looked like tennis rackets, and when snow turned to ice, we made Eskimo igloo homes. Christmas was fun at Charlie's. Most people shopped at the large Montgomery Ward store for clothes, candy, toys those days. At least twice a year we went there for clothes. It was something you looked forward to. I remember getting my first doll at Uncle's. I must have been age 10. I was so happy those days. Even if someone made something for you, you were happy. We look forward to ribbon candy and all kinds of nuts. Most people nowadays, even children, get too much. I have a poem about the old outhouse. I love it. Some people buy them now and paint them up beautiful and put plants in them. The place had 3 holes, small, medium, and large, and a peek hole to see if anyone was coming, and spider webs to see what got caught in them, and toilet paper, none yet. The old Montgomery catalog was available. Soon Joe or Georgia was gone. I knew she was going out with someone. She came by later and was married to a person whose last name was LaGuardia. She came and got me a few times in a 1930 car, Model T Ford, with celluloid windows, and at times had to wind it up in front. The tires were then compared to tires now. The tires were very thin. Then one day I went to see the Fords, and as I was crossing the road, I didn't see a car coming and was knocked out. I don't remember hurting then, but later on I had a back problem. Then Ma showed up and I went with her. Dewey stayed with Uncle Charlie. We lived in many apartments in Albany, New York, and I went to many public schools. I was a lonely child and at times had the wrong playmates, and somehow in my mind I considered myself very stupid and ugly. Once in a while Ma would say, "Come on, we are going to Boston." Why? I don't know. We'd start walking, then come back. I was what they call today a keychain kid. Ma wasn't very affectionate, displaying mother love, maybe because her parents passed away when she was young, or because she was always working and I didn't know how a mother is supposed to act. To me, Ma was my security, the one who took care of me. Once in a while I got to see my brother Dewey, mostly in the summer. Then once in a while Ma and I would hitchhike out to see my sister Vivian. One day, who should pick us up but my principal of the public school? I went to Ma, I went to Ma, and she said, "Tell her our car broke down." Vivian was married and lived in her in-laws' Empey's farm in Schoharie County, town of Lawyersville. They had a large house. One side Lee and the family lived, and other side Vivian and her husband Louis. At that time, Vivian had 2 babies. My brother-in-law Louis had a younger brother my age, Lee, or Junie, and a sister my age, Gladys. So we all had fun together. Sometimes Dewey came, and I know we must have drove Mrs. Empey crazy, jumping on the bed. Sometimes I got my head stuck in the old iron railings in the front of the bed. Hide and seek in and out the closets, run up and down the high, narrow stairs, go to the barn, jump in the hay, swing on the ropes, and the tall tree outside had a strong, thick rope with a large knot on it. Eventually, Mrs. Empey would catch us and say, "You kids come with me. I have some vegetables you can pick and some string beans. Snap the ends off. You can't go through life playing games." She knew many ways to keep us active. And I loved eating at her large table, as there was always many for a meal. Her children, farm help, and whoever dropped in. That was the custom on farms, always a place for guests who happened to show up. After supper, us kids played pick-up-the-sticks, checkers, and loved to hear Papa Lee Empey argue politics. One good thing in the 30s, most people were in the same boat, poor, and they helped one another. I can still remember one apartment. It was just a large room with a very tiny kitchen and an old icebox. The large room had a bed built into the wall that came down at night, and always 2 or 3 people. Some cousins slept on the floor. Money was hard to come by those days. One of the cellar apartments we lived in, my bed was under the front stairs. A large living room with a big bed, a small kitchen with a gas heater for hot water. Dewey and I would light it, and some of our hair and eyebrows went with it. This place was owned by a couple of old ladies and had 3 floors of rooms rented out. Ma collected the rents for the ladies. Later they asked Ma if she would like to take care and rent a home they owned in a place called Latham, New York. So Ma got a waitress job at a diner called the Circle Diner, and we moved into a large old brick house. I was alone a lot at night and was scared. Old houses have creepy noises. Under the blankets went my head. Why we think the boogeyman can't catch us there? I guess it's just a thought for protection. While there, I made some friends, but not the best. I wanted attention a lot, so I would make believe I was an opera singer and sing for them. Brother Dewey came once in a while, and one time he had an appendix attack at birth, so I had to go to the hospital. Georgia came also with her beautiful baby with blonde hair, Donald. He must have been 2 or 3. And one night, as I was sitting outside on the steps with my friends, I got up and was bleeding. I was scared. I was 11 then. So I went into the house, and Joe called me up and explained to me what happened. She said I was a young lady now and told me what to do every month. And later on, how or why, it was moved again to Herkimer, New York, not too far away. Ma rented a room, and the landlady made sure I had my meals. Ma made friends with a nice family next door and got a job in another diner as a waitress. Then soon Ma rented a large house and took care of it for someone. It had many rooms for rent. Those days there weren't beautiful condominiums, only small tourist cabins and rooms for rent in private homes. Well, Ma did good. Then after a while the owners came back and took it over. Then Ma found another house she rented down the street with rooms for transients. Ma did very well there, had a few close friends. Herkimer had a beautiful pond to swim in, beautiful parks, and in the winter a large ice skating rink. I was in the Girl Scouts there, and in the summer went to camp. In Herkimer, we used to go on horse-drawn hay rides, and afterwards stop and have hot chocolate somewhere. I even tried violin lessons, but was never relaxed enough to study. I enjoyed singing in the school choir and read a lot of good books. I really loved education, books, art, music, and the library was my home and education. To the finer things of life, Greek culture, all kinds of mythology of foreign countries, but my downfall, no confidence in myself. Later on, Ma got sick and had to have a kidney removed. Mama had a lot of female problems, but never complained. After all, she would have had 12 kids if they lived. Ma was a kind, generous person and made friends easy. She never turned away a tramp who came to our house for something to eat. At times, Dewey and I were together here, and even Aunt Lula and my cousin Avis came for a short stay. Just once Daddy came, but I was still scared of him. At times, I even hated my mother, especially when I was in a family of loving parents and children. I really didn't understand her and what she went through till I was married and had a child. Then the worst happened. I just turned 15 when Ma took a train to Albany, New York to visit my sister Jo and husband Ed. She was supposed to have taken a train to come back to Herkimer, but we never saw her again. I was devastated. Not again. I lost my security, my protector. How insecure I was. I never learned responsibility in any form. I didn't know how to think, act. As far as I was concerned, I was just a stupid person. I was happy when people ran my life. I just never learned. I was responsible for my life in action. At 84, nothing is worse than to bring up kids never to teach them responsibility for themselves and others, even for taking care of things. Never learning to be aggressive in handling life's problems daily. Always afraid you'll hurt people's feelings. You'll anger them. They won't understand you. This is as bad when a parent says you'll never amount to nothing over and over, or repeatedly calling you a dumb cluck or a dumbbell. My sister Jo and Vivian came to get me and to get some of the things from the house, and I went to live with Jo and Ed in Albany, New York. Edward O'Connell was a lawyer and had 2 young boys from his first marriage. The former wife and mother had passed away, so Jo married Ed and took over as stepmother. To the 2 boys, 3 and 4, Jean and Eddie, I was in 7th grade then, and the school was near Jo's house. I made friends with the family, the Colburns. They had 8 children, a nice Irish family. Nearly all the street was Irish then. Ed used to drink too much at times, but he was a good man. He was good to me anyway. After a while, I went to Hackett Junior High School. Those days you walked and hoped it didn't rain, as no one had school bags like now. It was paper bag. I regarded Jo like a sister mother, and she did her best for me, but I had so many head problems it was very hard to be responsive to her help. I worked one summer for a friend of hers. She was single and had 2 boys and a girl, 6, 7, and 8. I cleaned the house, washed clothes, and did some cooking. While working there, my friend Betty Colburn met her future husband, Bob. He was the nurse's nephew. I started studying voice at 16 age with a Professor Rolando and sang in churches and at school. Later on, had a couple of other voice teachers. When it was time to go to high school, I quit. I just had no incentive or future outlook for life. I just had poor self-esteem. Later on, I also took care of some children on Georgia Street, Oakwood Avenue, 2 girls and a boy in a very nice family. My sister Jo at this time had a few miscarriages, so she was pretty sick. One was a large cyst that made her look 9 months pregnant. She went through a trying time, and Ed didn't help as he drank too much at times, but Joe was one who had a lot of old-fashioned gumption, or get-up-and-go fortitude. I used to sneak into the hospital to see her. She looked so bad, I went home and cried. Later on, I met a friend of Ed's, a client of his called Aunt Grace. Mrs. Schindler, she asked me if I would like to stay with her. She lived nearby. She had a nice second-floor apartment of 6 rooms, so I moved in with her. Aunt Grace had a lot of patience with me. At times, I would stand in a corner and wish I were dead, or get so sick I'd die or disappear. If it were in this day and age, I'd be either on drugs or had slashed my wrist, as some do for the hurts in life. Soon I got a job at the Montgomery Ward store as a multiple scaler. I weighed packages that went overseas and put stamps on them. There were many young people working there, so I enjoyed the work. I met another girl there, Betty, and we became friends, and soon she came to live at Aunt Grace's apartment. Betty was going to a business college. Aunt Grace was a very motherly person. She let us have friends over, boys and girls. Soon I started to go to her Methodist church and sing in the choir. Later on, I went to a Dutch Reformed church downtown and became friends with 2 girls who sang in the choir. Soon we sang trio and duets and single, and we got paid for it. Later, the organist tried to get fresh with us, so we left the choir, and a young man who was the assistant organist went with us. We took a train weekends to another church nearby where we all sang for a while. I sang in so many churches. One was a high Episcopalian church with bats flying around the very high ceilings. We wore a ruffled neck piece like ancient Queen Elizabeth and robes, but it was interesting. Later on, Aunt Grace said, "Myra, you've got to learn to live on your own. You've got to learn responsibility for yourself." I was so scared. What'll I do? Wow, where do I go? Even though I went through a lot so far, I always had someone doing for me, some form of security. I never learned the word responsible or responsibility. So where to? I went to the YWCA and got a room, $3 a month. Those days and summer, no fan or air condition. It was hot, hot, and hot. My friend Betty had a brother I dated once in a while. He wanted to marry me. I was 18 but not mature in thinking. Later on, a cleaning lady at the YWCA told me she had a rooming house and had a small room available if I wanted it. So I moved. It was small, just a bed and 1 dresser, closed closet in the hall, and like most rooming houses, 1 bathroom on each floor. Finally, why I don't know, I quit the job at Montgomery Ward's and worked across the street in a printing place, reading for a proofreader. And again, summer heat, no fans or air conditioners, just hope you didn't think. The woman I read for was nice and liked opera music, so once in a while we went together to hear one. Her apartment she lived in was one mine I lived in years ago, a basement apartment with a nice backyard. Frida was good to me, very encouraging, along life's way. I had many people who wanted to be of help to me, but I was so withdrawn, caught up within myself and problems. Later, that job went. I was so unstable, I ended up at a factory that made shoe polish cans on a large sheet of metal, and until I learned how to take the sheet off properly, I had a few cuts on my wrists, and at night I was a hat check girl at a good hotel. In those days, men and women wore hats in winter. They checked their coats and hats. Many state senators were staying at this hotel, and I was 19 and good looking, so I had many chances for dates. But because of Dad, I was fearful of men. Life was just moving along. The war was on. 1940s. My brother Dewey was in the paratroopers. I was messed up. I saw no future. So on my 20th birthday, I went and enlisted in the Women's Army Corps, the WACs. And was surprised they took this uneducated girl, but they did.